Okay, ladies, this is a video about using EADMS. So the three things I'm going to cover in this video are how to administer a test online using EADMS, how to enter constructive response answers for your students. So those are the ones in your test that are not multiple choice or multiple response. Those are the questions where students are actually typing in their answers. And then the last thing we're going to look at is how to look at your reports after you've scored your students' tests. So you're going to go to EADMS.com, EADMS. Your username is just your Animo email. And then you should have already preset your password. So from the teacher's end, to administer the test, you're going to go to Administer Online Test. And then I find it easiest just to start with your grade. That usually takes off a lot of the tests, so you have a lot fewer options. And you can choose your content area, or in the category is usually district benchmarks. But I'd like to leave that one blank because going by Common Core Math and 7th grade, I usually find my test. So the test that I'm administering this quarter is quarter 1 GD Math 7 quarter 1 for general math. So then it'll take you to this. You'll select OK. And then you want to put in an amount of time. So our period's are only 55 minutes long. I usually put 60 minutes on here. And then you click Start Session. And this is the session ID that students will need to enter when they log in. So from a student's end, it's going to look a little bit different. So this is what you do as a teacher. You can let your students know their username is just their regular student ID, the 5-digit number. And they do not need a password. All they're going to enter is their username and the session ID. So you'll put this somewhere on the board that's easily visible for all of your students. It does not have to be capitalized. So if students enter the session ID with lowercase, it still works. So I'm going to log out so you can see what this will look like from a student's end. So from a student's end, they will go on to online. They'll click online testing. The only option they'll have is green dot for the district. They'll put in their 5-digit student ID, the session ID that you put up on the board, and then they'll click login. After they do that, they'll just have a screen that says begin test, and they'll click into their test. If you want to provide scratch paper for them, that's up to you. I like to have my students do this for math. I like to have them work out their problems on in their packet first, and then they enter their answers onto the screen. So that's completely up to you if you want to have them just work on the screen directly, or if you want to give them time away from the computer to work out their problems and then enter the answers onto your screen. So that's it for administering a test. So I'm going to log in again. To let you know how to enter constructive response. So you want to go to constructive response grading, CR grading. You need to select the group of students. So if I'm grading just by period, I'll select just one period. But since it's easier if you wait till the end and you want to do all of your classes all at once, you could just pick the course, and then it'll just have all of your classes listed. So I already entered my constructive response grading for the students that did finish their tests. So what you're going to see right now are just the students left that haven't finished. So the only test I have available is the quarter 1 midterm, which is the only one that my students have taken. So you can see I have 107 kids that already took the test, and then you'll see I have a bunch that still need to finish it. So my test had 9 constructive response items, so 9 questions where I need to look at their answers. So right here, it shows the students that already have an answer listed. You can see the student entered C equals 10H for the equation, and that was correct. So the questions where it's just very straightforward, like this is the answer, there's nothing else they could have put, no interpretation. The EADMS usually auto scores those, which is really helpful because especially when you have 9 constructed response items, and you have over 100 tests to score. It takes a long time if you need to look at each and every one. So for mine, most of them are auto-scored, and then I had the last two that were not. EADMS does take a while to load, so when you switch from screen to screen, it takes a few seconds. It's not very quick. So they'll give you the rubric if you want it shown, and you can select that here. So I like to have the rubric shown, show the item, so that'll just show you the question the students were looking at when they answered it. Some teachers like to hide student info, that way you're not biased when you're entering scores. And then some teachers like to show students with scores. So if I already gave a student a score, I like to take this button off, because that way I'm only looking at students that I still need to score. And generally, I don't hide student info, just because knowing who the student was helps me understand how they're writing. So because I've seen them throughout the quarter and throughout the semester for later tests for their final, I kind of know what they're writing and how they explain their work, so it helps me to see the student's name. So these are the students that don't have scores because they haven't submitted their test yet, so they're not done testing. When they have submitted their scores, their answers, you'll see exactly what they typed. So let me show that right now. So you can see for this question, it's a lot more open-ended. They had to explain what a point on the graph meant, then they had to find a different y value for when the x value equals 1. Parts B and C were also where they had to explain more in writing. So that's where I have to go through each of the students and read what they wrote, decide if that's using their rubric, decide if that's a 1, a 0, a 1, a 2, or a 3. So depending on the questions that your exams have, the rubric will be different. Also, don't feel like you have to follow the rubric like to the T. Sometimes there are questions where I feel that the rubric is too strict and I give partial credit to my students. But that will be something that you might want to work out with your department or with your a teacher that's teaching the same subject as you and same grade level. So I'll just scroll a little bit down so you guys can see the types of things that you'll see when your students enter. So you'll need to, I read through these and scored them. The student didn't, none of his answers were correct, so he got a 0. Only one of the answer was correct, so the student got a 1. So you'll have to go through all of your students in this way for constructed response if they're not auto-scored through EADMS. So this is the one that does take a long time. I do recommend doing your EADMS test online though, because this is easier to do than flipping through a student packet or over 100 student packets. You can choose to autosave. If you do choose to autosave, then every time you click an answer, that student's name is cleared. So that sometimes makes it a little bit tricky because you can be clicking, let's say I click Carolina's answer at a 0, her whole row will be cleared, and then if I'm ready to click on Isaiah, he won't be the second student anymore. He'll now be the first student because Carolina's row was cleared. So I hope that makes sense. So then I might want to be clicking a 0 for Isaiah, but I end up clicking a 0 for the next student. So I like to just leave it as I don't have it auto-save, and then at the end, after I've entered all of the scores, you'll have to hit save before the scores are recorded. So that's it for constructed response. Once you're done with all of your classes, then you have your full scores for your exam. So now we can look at reports. So just from the home screen, these are just the same thing as these. So I'm going to go to reports, and there are a lot of different reports that you can look at through EADMS. I'm just going to show you the one that I use often because it's the one that I find the most useful. So I like to go into group reports and then performance level reports. So if you guys have time, or when you have time, you can look through all different kinds of reports. There are a lot of different ways that you can look at the analyze your data. So I'm going to choose my math students, and then I'll look at just let's take my third period. My second period, a lot of them didn't get to finish, so I'm not going to look at theirs. And then they'll let me choose the test. The only test they have available is the one that we just took. So that'll be the only one. So I can see 26 of my students tested. So that kind of lets you, helps you see too how many didn't test. So I can see I have 31 students in this class and only 26 finished their test. Okay, so the performance summary, you can select the type of report. The performance summary breaks down by subgroup. So it'll break it down with all students, English learners, and SPED students. And the one that I like to use is the performance levels. This is the one that I use for grading too. So it gives you a visual, which I like using. And then it only has 4 bands. So standard exceeded, standard met, standard nearly met, and then standard not met. For grading, I like to, so at the end of every big exam, so every GD cap, I do a little award ceremony for my students, and I pass out awards to students who met the standard and students who exceeded the standard. No one exceeded in this class. So then I like to show their students, and then I go into these names, but I don't show these names, and that's, I let them know if you didn't see your name in either of these 2 bands and you want to know exactly what you got, you can come see me after class, because I don't want to show the names of students that didn't meet or nearly met the standard unless they want to see it themselves. And I wouldn't be projecting that to the whole class. But the students that met the standard and exceeded, I do show to the whole class, and then they get a little award and a little candy and recognition. That's something that I do at the end of the unit. For grading, I'll have this on the PowerPoint as well, but for what I do for grading, I don't enter the students' grades specifically with what the point level they got. So I use the grading. So for my test, only students will only get an A, B, C, or D. So because they only have 4 performance bands, that's what I use for grading. So I'll explain this a little bit in more detail on the PowerPoint, but this is the report that I like to use. It's the performance level reports, and you'll find it under group reports. Like I said, there are many, many more that you can look through. There's individual students, there's subgroups. You can look at just the standards. You can look at the problems that they've missed. Your department chair would be able to help you a lot more with looking at your content-specific reports. So I'm going to go ahead and log out. And so we just went over administering a test online, entering a constructed response answers, and then how to find the report that I find the most useful. Thanks, guys.